The cruelest betrayal is not finding another woman in your husband's arms. It is realizing he chose the one woman who knew exactly how much losing him would destroy you. Isabella Blackwood stood motionless at the end of the torchlit corridor, staring at the woman walking beside her husband. Madeline Hayes, her oldest friend, her safest secret, the woman who had once held Isabella while she cried and promised that no crown, no court, no man would ever come between them. Yet tonight Madeline wore Alexander's black fur cloak around her shoulders, its silver clasp resting against her throat as though it belonged there. The Alpha King walked beside her without speaking. He was still dressed in the dark ceremonial clothes he had worn at the winter feast, broad shoulders rigid beneath embroidered leather, his pale eyes fixed ahead. Neither of them had noticed Isabella. Not yet. She could have called his name. She could have demanded an explanation before the entire court. Instead, she watched. Alexander reached the carved oak doors of the royal bedchamber, the room he shared with his Luna, the room where he had once promised Isabella that no matter how cruel his kingdom became, there would always be one place where she would never have to doubt him. Madeline glanced over her shoulder. Their eyes met. Isabella felt the world narrow to that single moment. Surprise flashed across Madeline's face, followed by something Isabella could not understand. Guilt, perhaps, or pity. Somehow pity hurt worse. Alexander opened the door. "Come inside," he told Madeline quietly. Isabella's fingers went cold. Madeline hesitated for only a heartbeat before crossing the threshold. Alexander followed her. The door closed. Isabella heard the latch fall into place. Behind her, the feast continued as if nothing had happened. Music drifted through the palace corridors. Nobles laughed beneath chandeliers. Somewhere, a servant dropped a silver tray and cursed beneath his breath. The kingdom continued breathing while something inside its Luna went perfectly still. "Your Grace," a young maid whispered nearby. Isabella turned. The girl immediately lowered her eyes, but not quickly enough. Isabella had seen it, that terrible softness in her expression. Sympathy. She already knows, Isabella thought. Perhaps everyone does. Suddenly, she remembered the whispers at dinner, the glances exchanged when Madeline sat unusually close to Alexander, the court ladies who had fallen silent whenever Isabella approached. She had ignored every sign because Madeline was her friend and Alexander was her mate. Trust had made a fool of her more thoroughly than any enemy ever could. Isabella looked again at the closed bedchamber door. Her hand rose instinctively toward it, then stopped. She imagined knocking. She imagined Alexander opening it and asking her to understand. She imagined herself begging for an explanation while Madeline stood behind him wearing his cloak. No, whatever waited beyond that door, Isabella would not surrender the last piece of herself to it. Slowly, she lowered her hand. The Luna straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and walked away without making a sound. She did not know yet where she would go. She knew only one thing with absolute certainty. When Alexander opened that door again, Isabella would not be waiting on the other side. Long before Isabella became Luna, she had learned that cruelty rarely needed to raise its voice. Sometimes it smiled across a banquet table, sometimes it hid behind a compliment, and sometimes it whispered just loudly enough for her to hear. She had been 17 when the first noblewoman called her little wolf weak, 20 when a visiting lord suggested no Alpha King would ever choose a woman whose wolf was smaller than half the females at court, and 22 when Alexander Blackwood proved them all wrong by standing before the kingdom and naming Isabella as his Luna. She remembered Madeline squeezing her hand that night, laughing through tears as she told Isabella she had always known Alexander would see what everyone else had missed. Isabella had believed her. She had believed Alexander too, especially when he ignored princesses with ancient bloodlines and daughters of powerful alpha families to choose the quiet girl everyone considered beneath him. For years, that choice had been Isabella's armor. Whenever the court whispered that she was too gentle, too ordinary, too weak to stand beside the most feared Alpha King in the Western kingdoms, she reminded herself that Alexander knew her heart. When Madeline began spending more time at the palace, Isabella welcomed her without hesitation. She gave her rooms near the royal wing, introduced her to noble families, defended her when courtiers questioned why a woman without title or influential blood had such access to the Luna. Madeline had been family long before Isabella had a crown. That was why the sight of Alexander closing their bedchamber door behind her had cut deeper than any stranger could have managed. By the time Isabella reached the great staircase, the winter feast had begun spilling into the surrounding halls. Couples danced beneath golden candlelight, while musicians played from the gallery. Isabella descended slowly, hoping to reach her chambers without attracting attention, but conversations changed as she passed. "I thought Lady Madeline had already retired," one woman murmured. "Not to her own chambers," another answered. A soft laugh followed. Isabella kept walking. "Perhaps His Majesty finally understands what the kingdom needs." Her foot stopped on the next stair. "A stronger Luna," came the answer. "Someone capable of giving him heirs worthy of his blood." Isabella forced herself to continue. Each word followed her like an arrow she refused to pull from her flesh. Once, she would have endured it because Alexander would eventually find her, touch her cheek, and make the entire court seem insignificant. Tonight she understood how dangerous that dependence had become. Her worth could not continue rising and falling according to whether one powerful man chose to look at her. She reached the private corridor leading toward her dressing rooms and caught her reflection in a tall silver mirror. Pale face, trembling fingers, the royal moonstone at her throat, Alexander's mating mark hidden beneath the collar of her gown. She looked like a Luna. She did not feel like one. For one terrible moment, she wanted to run back upstairs, pound on the bedchamber door, and demand that Alexander choose her again. The realization humiliated her more than the whispers had. Isabella removed the moonstone necklace and closed her fist around it. No, she would not compete with Madeline. She would not stand outside her own marriage asking permission to matter. If Alexander had an explanation, he had possessed every opportunity to give it before taking her best friend behind a locked door. Isabella had spent years believing being chosen by the Alpha King proved she was worthy. Tonight, for the first time, she wondered who she might become if she stopped needing his choice at all. By the time Isabella returned to the royal bedchamber, the candles had burned low enough to drown the room in shadows, and Alexander still had not come back. She stood just inside the doorway, staring at the enormous bed where she had slept beside him for 4 years, and felt strangely calm. The pain was still there, buried somewhere beneath her ribs, but it had hardened into something quieter now, something useful. Isabella crossed to the wardrobe and changed out of her silver feast gown, replacing silk and jewels with a plain wool dress, riding boots, and a heavy traveling cloak. She packed only what belonged to her before she became Luna. 2 dresses, her mother's comb, a small leather purse of coins, and the worn book Madeline had given her when they were girls. Her fingers lingered over the book before she quietly returned it to the shelf. Some memories, she realized, were heavier than luggage. At the dressing table, Isabella removed the moonstone necklace, then stared at the gold ring Alexander had placed on her finger before the entire kingdom. She remembered his voice that day, steady and certain. "I choose you, Isabella. Not because the bond commands it. Because I do." Her throat tightened. Slowly, she pulled off the ring and placed it beside the necklace. Last came the silver crest identifying her as Luna of Blackwood. 3 objects. 3 promises. 3 things that no longer felt like hers. Isabella found parchment and dipped a quill into the ink. She thought she would have pages of accusations to write, questions to demand, grief to pour onto paper. Instead, only one sentence came. "I believed. You and the whole kingdom told me not to." She folded the letter and placed Alexander's ring on top of it. Then she left. No servants followed her. No guards questioned the Luna when she crossed the lower courtyard and ordered her gray mare saddled. Snow had begun falling over Blackwood Keep, soft white flakes disappearing against her dark cloak. Isabella mounted and looked once toward the illuminated windows of the royal wing. Somewhere behind those walls were the 2 people she had trusted most. She turned her horse toward the northern gate. Before dawn colored the horizon, Blackwood Keep had vanished behind the forest. Alexander returned to their bedchamber less than an hour later. He entered distractedly, already reaching for the clasp of his coat. "Isabella." Silence answered him. He frowned. Then he saw the open wardrobe, the missing traveling cloak, the moonstone, the Luna crest, and finally the ring resting on folded parchment. Alexander stopped breathing. He crossed the room and opened the letter. 1 sentence. That was all she had given him. His eyes read it once, then again, and the terrible meaning settled over him. No, his wolf surged beneath his skin. Alexander rushed into the corridor. Guards! His roar shook the stone walls. Men appeared almost instantly. Find the Luna. Close every gate. No one leaves Blackwood land. The captain went pale. Your Majesty, Alexander turned on him. What? The Northern Watch reported the Luna passing before first light. They believed she traveled under your authority. Alexander stared toward the windows, where dawn was beginning to bleed across the snowy horizon. For the first time in his reign, the Alpha King understood what it meant to give an order too late. By dawn, his Luna was gone. Alexander had commanded armies into battle, sentenced traitors with a word, and watched powerful alphas lower their eyes when he entered a room. But none of that power could bring back the woman who had ridden away before dawn. Seal the northern roads, he ordered as guards flooded the courtyard. Search every village, every crossing, every trail to the border. His captain hesitated. Your Majesty, the Luna has several hours on us. Alexander's eyes flashed gold. Then stop wasting them. His wolf clawed beneath his skin, furious at the weakening pull of the mate bond, demanding that he hunt, find, claim, bring her home. Alexander wanted the same thing, and that terrified him. Isabella was not a fugitive. She was his wife, and she had left because of him. By noon, riders returned with nothing. Fresh snow had buried tracks beyond the northern forest, and Isabella had apparently abandoned the main road. Alexander stood over a map when another useless report arrived. Get out, he growled. The guards vanished. Only then did he allow himself to unfold Isabella's letter again. I believed you when the whole kingdom told me not to. The sentence was becoming unbearable. He remembered every time she had defended him, when nobles called him cruel, when neighboring rulers called him a monster, when frightened servants avoided his gaze. Isabella had always looked directly at him. She had trusted the man beneath the crown, and he had rewarded that trust by asking her to endure a secret he had never bothered to explain. A knock sounded. Madeline entered before he answered. Alexander, we need to discuss last night. His wolf snarled at her scent. You should leave. Madeline stiffened. Isabella saw us, didn't she? His gaze snapped toward her. You knew? I saw her in the corridor. Alexander crossed the room, so quickly Madeline stepped backward. And you said nothing? We couldn't risk anyone knowing why I was there. She was my wife. His voice dropped dangerously. She was not anyone. Madeline swallowed. The evidence I brought concerns people inside your council. If they discovered enough. Alexander turned away before anger overcame judgment. Madeline had brought him information about a conspiracy within the court, evidence too dangerous to discuss anywhere servants or guards might overhear. Bringing her into the royal bedchamber had seemed practical. Safe. He had told himself Isabella would understand when the danger passed. He had never considered what she would see, what the court would whisper, or how deeply Madeline's presence there would humiliate her. He had expected Isabella's trust without giving her truth. Worse, he had expected her to remain simply because she always had. Alexander looked toward the empty chair beside the hearth where she used to read while waiting for him after council meetings. He remembered nights when he returned without speaking and she silently poured his wine. Mornings when she fastened his cloak before battle. Hundreds of ordinary kindnesses he had accepted as permanent features of his life. His chest tightened as the mate bond stretched thinner. Isabella was moving farther away. Alexander closed his eyes and reached instinctively through the bond, searching for warmth, reassurance, anything. He found only distance. For the first time, the most powerful man in the kingdom understood the difference between possessing someone's loyalty and deserving it. He could command every soldier in Blackwood to search for Isabella. He could close roads, threaten border lords, and send wolves across the mountains. But there was one command even an Alpha King could not give. He could not order Isabella to trust him again. For the first time in 4 years, Isabella woke somewhere no one knew her name, and the strange thing was that she could finally breathe. The village of Greyhaven lay beyond Blackwood's northern border, hidden between snow-covered mountains and a frozen river, a poor settlement of timber cottages where nobody cared about royal courts or Luna crests because surviving winter required all the attention they possessed. Isabella had arrived exhausted, half-frozen, and calling herself simply Isabella. Widow Mara Bennett, keeper of the village inn, had given her a room in exchange for work, and for 6 days Isabella carried firewood, scrubbed tables, and helped prepare stew without anyone bowing when she entered. Her hands blistered. Her back ached. Yet every evening, she slept more peacefully than she had beneath silk sheets at Blackwood Keep. Then the snowstorm came. It buried the mountain road before sunset, trapping Greyhaven beneath nearly 3 feet of snow. By midnight, the village grain store collapsed under the weight, destroying much of their winter food. Panic spread immediately. "We have enough for 10 days, the village elder announced inside the crowded inn. Perhaps 12. Arguments erupted. Some wanted to ration everything. Others wanted to send riders through the storm. Isabella listened until a frightened mother asked what would happen when the milk ran out for the children. Something inside her changed. "How many hunting bows do you have?" Isabella asked. Everyone turned toward her. The elder frowned. "Enough. What? And how many empty cellars?" Within an hour, Isabella had organized what no one else had thought to organize. Grain was counted by household rather than guest. Root vegetables were moved from damaged buildings into underground storage. Hunters were divided into rotating groups, so no family lost its only able-bodied adult. She ordered snow melted for livestock instead of wasting drinking water, and had the inn kitchen turned into a communal cookhouse to reduce fuel consumption. Nobody asked how an ordinary traveler knew how to manage shortages. They were too busy following her. 3 days later, danger came from somewhere colder than hunger. Wolves appeared beyond the eastern cottages just after dusk. Not ordinary animals, but rogues, shifters without pack territory, driven toward Greyhaven by starvation. Men reached for weapons. Isabella smelled fear everywhere. "Do not scatter," she commanded. The authority in her own voice startled even her. Her wolf stirred beneath her skin, smaller than Alexander's monstrous beast, smaller than the wolves the Blackwood court had mocked her for failing to rival, but steady. Isabella positioned archers on rooftops, moved children into the stone chapel, and ordered lanterns placed along one narrow approach, deliberately leaving another dark. The rogues followed the apparent weakness exactly as she expected and entered the livestock passage, where Greyhaven's hunters surrounded them. No villagers died. By sunrise, the surviving rogues had fled into the mountains. Isabella stood in the snow watching families emerge from the chapel. A little girl ran toward her and wrapped both arms around her waist. Then another villager thanked her. Then another. No one called her Luna. No one knew an Alpha. King had once chosen her. They followed because she had earned their trust. Isabella looked at her blistered hands and felt something inside her settle into place. All those years, she had believed Alexander's choice transformed a weak girl into someone worthy of standing beside a king. Greyhaven had taught her the truth. The crown had never created her value. It had merely distracted her from seeing what had been there all along. Alexander found Isabella 12 days after she disappeared, and for 12 days he had imagined 100 things he would say when he finally saw her again. But every one of them vanished the moment he entered Greyhaven and realized she looked happier without him. She stood in the village square beneath a pale winter sky, her hair loosely braided, her cheeks pink from the cold, a plain wool cloak wrapped around the body that had once been covered in royal silk. There was no moonstone at her throat, no silver Luna crest over her heart, nothing announcing that she belonged to a king. Yet people gathered around her as though she wore a crown anyway. An old woman handed her bread. 2 children followed at her heels. A broad-shouldered young warrior named Caleb Miller stood beside her carrying firewood, smiling at something Isabella had said. Alexander's wolf surged so violently that his vision flashed gold. "Mine." The word tore through him with primitive certainty. Caleb looked toward the approaching royal riders and instinctively stepped closer to Isabella. A growl rolled from Alexander's chest. Every villager went silent. Isabella turned. Their eyes met across the snow. For one terrible heartbeat, Alexander forgot how to breathe. The mate bond, stretched thin for days, suddenly burned between them again, alive and furious. Isabella's face betrayed one flicker of pain before becoming calm. "Alexander. Not your majesty. Not my king. Not husband. Just Alexander." He dismounted. "You are coming home." Her expression did not change. No, his soldiers shifted uneasily behind him. No one refused the Alpha King publicly. Alexander stepped closer. "Isabella, whatever you believe happened that night, I know what I saw." "Then you saw something new." Did not understand. A bitter smile touched her mouth. And whose fault was that? The question struck harder than anger could have. Alexander lowered his voice. We should discuss this privately. You had privacy with Madeline. Isabella's words were quiet, but several villagers heard them. Alexander flinched. Caleb moved between them by half a step, and Alexander's wolf exploded against his control. His eyes locked on the younger man. Move. Caleb went pale, but remained where he was. She said she doesn't want to go. Alexander could have broken him in seconds. Every instinct demanded that he remind this stranger exactly who stood before him. Take Isabella onto his horse, return to Blackwood Keep, and lock every gate until the world understood that the Luna belonged beside her alpha. His hand curled into a fist. Then Isabella looked at him, and Alexander saw something worse than hatred in her eyes. Expectation. She expected him to force her. Somewhere during their marriage, the woman he loved had learned to believe his power would eventually matter more than her choice. Alexander felt ashamed. Slowly, deliberately, he stepped backward. His wolf howled inside him. Very well. Isabella blinked. What? I said you were coming home. His voice roughened. I was wrong. The admission seemed to cost the entire village its breath. Alexander looked at Caleb, then at the frightened villagers, and finally back at his wife. Stay here if that is what you choose. Isabella stared at him as if she had prepared herself for every possible battle except surrender. Alexander wanted to tell her about the conspiracy, about Madeline, about everything he had been trying to protect her from. But explanations given under the shadow of his army would sound too much like another command. He mounted his horse. I will not drag you back to a place you no longer consider home. Then the Alpha King turned his army south. He did not look behind him, because if he saw Isabella standing beside another man, he feared his strength would fail. For the first time since she had become his Luna, Alexander left Isabella with something he should have given her long ago, the freedom to choose whether she would ever return. 3 days after Alexander returned to Blackwood Keep without Isabella, the first traitor finally made his move. Lord Marcus Vale entered the royal council chamber carrying a treaty already sealed by 4 northern houses, and Alexander knew before the man opened his mouth exactly what price they intended to demand. The kingdom requires stability, Marcus said, placing the parchment on the table. And with the Luna absent, our enemies believe the throne is vulnerable. Alexander remained seated, expression cold. Get to the point. Marcus smiled. Marry Lady Catherine Ashford. Her father controls 12,000 soldiers. The northern houses will renew their loyalty, and this unfortunate business with Isabella can be forgotten. Alexander's wolf stirred at the suggestion. My wife is not an unfortunate business. Silence fell. Marcus's smile disappeared. Your wife abandoned her post. She abandoned me. There is a difference. Before Marcus could answer, the council doors opened and Madeline entered carrying a leather case. Several lords immediately stood. Your Majesty, she said, pale but steady. You need to see this now. She emptied the case across the table. Coded letters, payment records, military routes, and correspondence bearing the seals of men sitting in that very room. Alexander read the first page and felt his blood turn cold. The conspiracy had never been aimed primarily at his throne. It had been aimed at Isabella. The traitors intended to assassinate the Luna, blame rogue wolves, then pressure Alexander into a political marriage that would place their chosen bloodline beside the crown. Marcus lunged for the documents. Guards seized him before he reached the table. Lies, he shouted. Madeline faced the council. I collected these letters over 6 months. That is why I met the king privately. Her voice faltered. That is why I was in his bedchamber. Alexander looked at her sharply as she continued. But Isabella deserves the whole truth. I knew she saw us that night. I could have gone after her. I didn't. Madeline lowered her eyes. Part of me enjoyed being important enough to stand beside the king. I enjoyed knowing the court was watching. She trusted me, and I let jealousy turn that trust into a weapon. Alexander felt disgust, but none of it erased his own guilt. He had noticed Madeline lingering too close. He had seen the whispers spreading and dismissed them because explaining himself seemed inconvenient. He had protected Isabella's life while carelessly destroying her faith in him. Marcus laughed bitterly from the guard's grip. None of this matters. Reject the Ashford alliance and the northern armies withdraw. Your throne will bleed before spring. Alexander looked at the treaty. One signature could secure his reign. One marriage could preserve the political order his ancestors had built. He picked up the parchment. Marcus smiled. Alexander tore it in half. Then again. Release every letter to the court, he ordered. Every name. Every payment. Everything. His advisors stared at him in horror. Your Majesty, one whispered. The scandal could fracture the kingdom. Then let it fracture on the truth. Alexander rose. I will not save my crown by allowing my wife to carry the shame of my silence. Marcus's face twisted. You would risk a kingdom for one woman? Alexander stepped toward him, eyes burning gold. No, I am risking my crown because I finally understand that a king who demands loyalty while hiding the truth deserves neither. Outside, alarm bells suddenly thundered across Blackwood Keep. A guard burst through the doors, breathless. Your Majesty, northern banners are approaching. Thousands. Alexander looked toward the snow-covered battlements as soldiers began running through the courtyard. The traitors had expected his refusal. War had already begun. He reached for his sword, knowing the choice might cost him everything. But for the first time since Isabella left, Alexander knew he had made a choice he would not ask her to forgive. Isabella learned the truth from a dying messenger who reached Greyhaven just before sunset, his horse collapsing beneath him in the snow and an arrow buried deep in his shoulder. Blackwood is under attack, he gasped as Caleb and 2 villagers carried him into the inn. Northern houses turned against the king. Isabella knelt beside him, pressing cloth against the wound. Why? The messenger pulled a blood-stained letter from inside his coat. The king rejected their alliance, ordered everything made public. Isabella unfolded the letter with trembling hands and read until the words blurred. The conspiracy, the plan to murder her, Madeline's secret investigation, Alexander's refusal to marry Catherine Ashford. Every answer Isabella had wanted was there, yet none of it erased what happened. Alexander had not betrayed their marriage with Madeline, but he had betrayed Isabella's trust by deciding what she deserved to know. Still, one line struck deeper than the rest. The northern armies had offered peace if Alexander surrendered his marriage and took Catherine as queen. He had refused. How many soldiers does Blackwood have? Isabella asked. Not enough. The messenger closed his eyes. The outer wall may fall by tomorrow night. Caleb watched Isabella rise. You're going back. Yes. Because he's your mate? Isabella looked toward the mountains separating her from the home she had abandoned. No. Because people I love are about to die. Before midnight, Greyhaven moved. Hunters, farmers, and the rogue shifters Isabella had spared gathered behind her, joined by men from neighboring settlements who had heard how she saved the village. She had no royal crest, yet they followed. By dawn they reached Blackwood Valley and found the kingdom burning. Northern soldiers surrounded the keep while Alexander's forces defended the main gate. Isabella saw him on the battlements, sword red with blood, fighting beside his men instead of hiding behind them. Then an enemy warrior raised a crossbow toward Alexander's unprotected back. Alexander! Isabella screamed. He turned as her arrow struck the attacker first. Across the battlefield, their eyes met. Shot crossed his face. Isabella drew another arrow. Open the eastern gate, she shouted. Alexander understood instantly. Blackwood soldiers opened it, apparently exposing a weakness. The northern army rushed toward the opening exactly as Isabella expected. Greyhaven's fighters descended from the wooded ridge and struck their flank while Alexander's cavalry charged through the gate. The battle collapsed within an hour. Marcus Vale was captured alive, and the remaining rebel lords surrendered before sunset. Madeline appeared in the courtyard under guard and publicly confessed everything. The conspiracy, the bedchamber meeting, and her own deliberate silence when she saw Isabella watching. I wanted what you had, she told Isabella, tears filling her eyes. For one ugly moment, I wanted you to feel uncertain because I had spent years envying how certain Alexander was about you. Isabella studied the woman who had once been her closest friend. I forgive you, she said quietly. Hope flashed across Madeline's face. But forgiveness does not restore trust. Madeline lowered her head and accepted exile from Blackwood without protest. When the courtyard finally emptied, Alexander approached Isabella. He stopped several feet away. He did not touch her. You came back. Isabella looked at the battered walls, the villagers who had followed her, and the king who had finally learned not to reach for what had not been freely offered. I came back because I chose to. Alexander swallowed. I know. For once, there was no command in his voice, no claim, no alpha certainty. And when Isabella walked past him into Blackwood Keep, Alexander did not follow until she turned at the doorway and quietly said, "Come with me." Alexander did not ask Isabella to forgive him that night, and somehow that mattered more than any apology he could have offered. 3 weeks passed while Blackwood buried its dead, repaired its walls, and put the surviving conspirators on trial. Marcus Vale was stripped of his lands and imprisoned for treason. The rebel houses surrendered their armies to the crown, and Madeline departed for a distant southern territory under permanent exile from court. Before leaving, she sent Isabella one final letter asking for nothing. Isabella read it once, folded it carefully, and placed it away with the memories of a friendship she could forgive without rebuilding. Then, on the first clear morning after the war, Alexander asked Isabella to meet him in the throne room. She entered expecting advisors and guards, but found the vast chamber empty. Alexander stood alone before the throne. No crown rested on his head. No sword hung from his belt. Even his royal cloak was gone. "Why are we here?" Isabella asked. Alexander looked at her for a long moment. "Because this is where everyone expects you to stand beside me, and I need you to know you don't have to." He approached slowly, stopping several feet away. "I protected you from a conspiracy while refusing to trust you with the truth. I told myself secrecy kept you safe. The truth is, I was arrogant enough to believe I could decide what you should know, what you should endure, and that you would still be there when I was finished deciding." Isabella's throat tightened, but she remained silent. Alexander lowered himself onto one knee. The Alpha King who had made warriors tremble and nobles bow now knelt before the woman his court had once called too weak to stand beside him. "I will never ask you to return because of the mate bond," he said. "I will never tell you that you belong to me. You proved you can build a life without this castle, without this crown, and without me. So I am asking for something I no longer believe I am entitled to." He held out Isabella's lunar ring. "Choose me again." Tears burned behind her eyes. Isabella looked at the ring, but did not take it. "If I stay, things change." "Name them." "No more secrets disguised as protection. No decisions about my life made without me. The Luna receives a permanent seat and vote on the Royal Council. Greyhaven and the northern border villages receive crown protection, grain reserves, and representation." Alexander answered without hesitation. "Done." Isabella studied him. "And if I disagree with you in front of the council?" A faint smile touched his face. "Then I suppose the council will finally become interesting." Isabella laughed, and the sound broke something painful between them. She took the ring, but instead of allowing Alexander to place it on her finger, she put it on herself. "This is my choice." "I know." Months later, Greyhaven's rebuilt grain house carried the Blackwood crest, and its elected representative sat at the royal council beside Isabella. She no longer occupied a ceremonial chair behind Alexander. She sat beside him with documents of her own and a voice no one could dismiss. One winter evening, after the council adjourned, Alexander led her back to the royal bedchamber. Isabella paused at the doorway, remembering another night, another closed door, another version of herself who had believed losing his love meant losing her worth. Alexander placed a small iron key in her palm. "What is this?" "Your new council chamber," he said. "Not mine. Yours." Isabella closed her fingers around it. Alexander touched her cheek gently. "Stay because you choose me." She looked at the man she had left, the king who had learned that love without trust was merely another kind of possession, and smiled. "This time I do." Then Isabella crossed the threshold beside him, not behind him, and when the door closed, there were no secrets left on either side.